welcome to the Oregon Business Matters podcast, brought to you by Oregon Business and Industry, your statewide Chamber of Commerce. At Oregon Business Matters, we focus on insights, issues, and initiatives that impact Oregonians' shared prosperity and the state's economic health. I'm Angela Wilhelms, President and CEO of OBI, and your host here at Oregon Business Matters. Today, we're going to talk about an industry that plays a central role in the typical Oregonian's daily life and shopping experience. But it's an industry that operates almost entirely below the radar. When you go to the store to buy a beverage, whether it's a non-alcoholic drink or a six-pack of beer, you're generally aware of the brand you're buying, obviously, as well as the store at which you're buying it. But what you don't often see is the distributor that brought that beverage to the store, probably stocked the shelf, and helped you as a consumer be connected with that product. Beverage distributors play an important but largely background role in linking manufacturers to retailers. Today I'm joined by Paul Meade, the CFO at Columbia Distributing, which is based in Wilsonville and operates in both Oregon and Washington. And it's one of the largest beverage distributors in the country. Columbia Distributing handles a broad mix of beverage brands, and we'll talk about some of those, including craft beers, sodas, waters, wines, a host of other brands. Columbia Distributing is also the biggest Red Bull distributor in the country, as I understand it. So we're going to talk to Paul, who's actually heading into retirement after a long and varied and productive career in the industry, which is why he's in a great position and a great person for us to talk to about what he's seeing in the company, in the industry. So, Paul, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Angela. Welcome to Columbia.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm well hydrated. I appreciate that as we get started in this interview. So, very happy to be affiliated with you guys in some small way through OBI and the work that you do, and grateful for the opportunity to chat with you today. We, at OBI, we talk a lot about supply chains. In addition to being the General State Chamber of Commerce, we actually are the state's affiliate for the National Association of Manufacturers and the National Retail Federation. So we love to connect the dots between producers and consumers through that chain. And, you know, that includes those of you in the beverage distribution industry, which plays a key role. So I'd love to just have you start by telling the audience a bit more about the role that distributors play in that supply chain and how you think about that work in the ecosystem of it all.
Yeah, so if you look at beverage distribution, primarily that related to alcohol, it's really comes out of prohibition. The initial design was to promote competitiveness between the brands, to collect taxes, and to ensure that everybody had a fair shake at getting to the retailer. Today, I think that plays a less important role, but still, in many ways, we're serving that same role in that we collect taxes, we get the product from our producers to the shelves, and we do that in a very effective and efficient manner, in which we hope gives the consumer the best opportunity to buy what products they like.
Okay, I have to admit, I cannot be the only person listening who didn't realize the origin story was part of prohibition and coming out of that. But when you describe it, it makes a lot of sense.
Yes, when it came to alcohol, if you think about what was going on, you had people that were dominating the markets and enforcing certain undesirable trade practices. And that was when prohibition was repealed, the third-tier system was put in place to prevent that from happening again.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So how do you decide as a distributor what product mix to represent and to distribute?
To a large degree, we let the consumers decide that. I've said for a long time that, what we sell is pretty predictable. We sell what the consumer wants. For us, we have a lot of very large brands, and then we have a lot of brands that are new entrants into the market. We're very instrumental in bringing craft beer to Oregon, starting with some of the very early craft pioneers such as Bridgeport or Deschutes or Full Sail Brewing. We look at, you mentioned Red Bull. The consumer has a strong demand for energy products right now, or better for you products. So we try and match what we sell to what the consumer wants.
I understand that there's a difference, and this was something that was new to me until I talked to you all about this a bit more, but there's a difference between distribution of alcoholic products and non-alcoholic products, which, again, when you pause and think about it, makes a lot of sense, but the consumers don't generally see that. Can you talk a little bit about that distinction?
It has to go with alcoholic products are generally regulated, and so we work. We have to be licensed. We have to operate under a fairly tight set of rules on how we go to market. We have to price things equally. We have to service all accounts. Whereas in non-alcoholic products, it's a little bit more of the Wild West. We can pretty much do whatever we want to do.
I'm just having this image of some of the mental pictures and imagery we can get of the people stocking the shelves in the Wild West kind of metaphor. So, well, as long as we're on the topic of beverage types, I'd like to talk a bit about distilled spirits in particular. You operate, as I mentioned, in Washington and Oregon, so multiple states, and states regulate liquor, among other alcoholic drinks, but liquor in particular, in different ways. So in Oregon, the state controls the distribution of distilled spirits, and Washington used to play a different role than they do now, but in 2011, voters changed that by allowing the privatization of the liquor market. What are your thoughts on that? One, how do you deal with that as a company, thinking about different state regulations? And then also, what do you think about where Oregon is?
Having lived through the privatization in Washington, what I would say is that there's things out of it that have been good for the state. But as a whole, I wouldn't say that has been an astounding success. As Oregon, and I would say that Columbia's position is not overtly adverse to privatization. We're adverse to a privatization bill that doesn't serve the constituents of Oregon and all parties well, including, liquor's the third largest source of revenue for the state of Oregon. We can't just pull that away. We want to retain control, so minors don't have access to liquor. So there's a lot to the equation. If privatizations occur, it has to work for everybody. In Washington, the end result has been they have the highest liquor prices in the country. And I don't think that access is a whole lot better. So if you're promoting choice and access and you want to find a good solution, you got to look at all elements of what that entails and hopefully find a balanced answer. Again, we're not overtly opposed. We're not strong supporters of privatization because I do believe that if you look at where the liquor stores in Oregon have come in the last 10 years, it's a vastly different picture than it was 10 years ago. Access is better. They're much nicer stores. You generally have the choice you want.
And I'm going to ask about another policy issue, and I probably should pause for a second and clarify that I am asking you to talk about your opinion on these and maybe represent Columbia's position as you did. These aren't necessarily OBI's positions on issues. We're in the business of kind of gathering intel from a wide variety of sectors. So we may or may not agree, but that's not the point here today. Where we want to talk with you. So there, obligatory statement taken care of.
Perfect. So
let's move to a second one then. The effective tax rate in Oregon on hard liquor is very high, but the taxes on beer, wine, cider, et cetera, are relatively low. And every year it seems that somebody proposes to raise those latter taxes. So talk a little bit from a distributor's perspective or your perspective specifically. Is it important to hold these taxes steady? Is it important to think about growing, raising more revenue off of them, lowering them? What do you think about that?
First of all, the liquor tax and taxes, again, are a big component of Oregon's economy and of their funding. There's a spread between, and there's always historically been a spread between hard liquor and beer. And if you think about it, a lot has to do with proof and the amount of alcohol you're actually purchasing based on your container or your volume. Again, this is my point of view on this, is that when you look at what's happening in Oregon as it relates to craft beer and wine and beer in general and spirits, now is not the time to raise taxes on these products. It will have an adverse impact. The consumer pays those taxes. I think that it's a mischaracterization to believe that the producers or the distributor is going to pay these taxes. Ultimately, this all gets passed on to the consumer, and if the consumer doesn't have the money to buy these products, it's going to hurt Oregon.
Yeah, I mean, this is one I do feel I can step in with some OBI positioning on. I mean, we generally agree that consumers are ultimately the ones that bear the costs of a lot of things that businesses may be the payors of technically, but that trickles down to consumers, and we've seen an affordability issue become one of the most important issues affecting Oregonians, and we do see it impacting Oregon-made products. And when we talk about competitiveness, I think it's important to put that on the table. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Some of the discussion around raising the taxes on these products is about treatment for addictive services or addictions and things like that. A astoundingly small percentage of the taxes collected on liquor go to addiction recovery or anything like that. So, to me, part of this is, just putting more money in the coffers of Oregon. And again, that's coming at the consumer's expense.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that point up. I think that's really important. A lot of times these specific revenue proposals or revenue raising proposals are brought forward and the most convenient or potentially impactful of the arguments is put out front as the rationale, when what you just said is exactly right. That doesn't necessarily even match where the funds are going, even if we did all agree that that was the right path forward. So another very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Oregon has this MO, if you will, of wanting to do things differently, of wanting to be unique in its approach to certain things. Are there other ways in which Oregon does things differently, or at least maybe a little more unusually from a beverage distribution standpoint than other states?
If you look at the way distributors get the products to the shelves, I would say that we don't do anything horribly uniquely. I think what has made Columbia successful is our scale and our ability to cover what is really a pretty geographically large state with a fairly concentrated population. But we call on customers in Lakeview and the same way we call on customers in Portland. And so, our ability to service the state efficiently is really a derivative of our size. And, once again, there's some people that will say that because we're so large, we're not creating competition. But we're getting migration, Portland Beer Brewery here, across the state, and creating that choice for the consumer, just like we're getting Coors Light out there.
Yeah, that's. I think that's interesting. People don't often think about the distribution and the role that it plays in the expansion of Oregon brands and products. We sometimes take for granted when we know a local product, and we assume everybody else is going to know it and love it and have access to it. But that doesn't happen automatically. Somebody's got to help create that access, and there are moments when scale matters, and it's scale that then helps other Oregon companies and other Oregon brands, and therefore jobs throughout the state, et cetera. So it's interesting.
One of the things I'm very proud about at Columbia is that when you look at how we cover the state, we have people in every community. These people that are working for us are coaching softball, they're involved in the Rotary, they're whatever it is. And so, we like to look at what we're, bringing to the table in that fashion. Is we're bringing living wage jobs to the communities, and our people are involved in the communities.
Yeah. How many employees do you have?
We have roughly 1,200 in Oregon.
Yeah. I mean, that's, again, by all definitions, that's a large employer, and but yet I wouldn't consider you some, faceless, nameless enterprise. Like you just said, your people are embedded in the community and part of the community, and you support them in that effort. So you mentioned size. We just talked about the number of employees. You have grown quite a bit over the last 20 years. We remind people all the time, every larger business starts as a small business and then over time grows. So, and a lot of that for you guys has been in the last 20 years or so. Can you talk about that growth and also what role consolidation played in that?
Yeah, and this is not unique to Oregon. If you look at distribution throughout the country, it does come back to scale and being able to effectively service these markets. We have the same pressures on wages and as every other company is facing in the state. We have to be efficient, and for us, that efficiency is being able to, again, go to a Lakeview with a full truck, and instead of going out there with a small truck that makes that trip to Lakeview really hard to make money on. And so the scale gives us the ability to service the market better. And we've seen that throughout the country. Is at one point in time, my numbers may be off a little bit here, there were 8,000 beer distributors in the U.S. Today there's under 2,000, I believe, somewhere around those numbers. And so what you're seeing is in order to effectively, for us to survive and effectively service the market, we need that scale.
And I think I don't want to impart something into what you just said that you may not agree with. So I'll try to pose this as a question, but it feels like what I'm sort of hearing in that, and what I've heard from other companies that have grown in part from consolidation, is that's actually healthy. It allows folks to stay in business, expand, keep those jobs active. I think the reason I'm pausing here for a second is because a lot of times we hear from policymakers that growth is good, but consolidation may not be good because they have some of them at least have a misunderstanding of how the two work together, and that what we're really after is economic activity, the preservation and growth of the jobs, and there are multiple ways to get at that.
As much as I'd like to think that Columbia is universally loved by all brewers and producers of our products, that would not be true, because there are people that clearly think that by us being larger, that they have less voice and less representation. And I would generally disagree with that. We're not for everybody. In all honesty, sometimes we're not the best answer for somebody that's just trying to get their product on the market and grow. But we're a really good answer for somebody that wants to get their product to the widest set of consumers possible.
No, that's good, and it's a good reminder that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, and what might make sense for some in growth and consolidation isn't going to make sense for other. And the other thing we're kind of constantly talking about is to have a healthy, robust economy, you need that ecosystem of small and medium and large that sort of work in orbit together to service the various channels and needs and lines. And so it isn't that you can't get away with it all small, you can't get away with all big. You need that sort of through line through all of it.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, so I'm going to pivot here a little bit abruptly, but I don't know how else to do it. But I want to ask about a federal issue for a second, because we talk a lot about state policy, but, we're in this moment of time where tariffs come up in many conversations that I have, or the possibility of tariffs. And particularly both on American products going elsewhere, which is probably less of an issue you're dealing with as a distributor here, but also tariffs on products made elsewhere coming into the United States that you probably distribute. What's your observation, or how are you at Columbia experiencing the conversation about tariffs?
Going back to the thing I said earlier, is that ultimately I believe the consumer is paying for most of this. What we're seeing is things like aluminum, and it may sound crazy, but one of the biggest inputs that we have are the aluminum cans, and our brewers and producers are having significant price increases due to the tariffs on aluminum. Just as a function of that, they're going to raise their price to us, and we're going to raise our price to the consumer, and so on. So what we're probably seeing more impact from the products that are going into our the goods that we're selling than actually the tariffs impacting us. Like you said, we don't sell outside of the country, so it's not a big thing there. But it's basically the inputs that we're seeing the impact from. As far as imported products, most of those suppliers for us have chosen to eat those tariffs, and it's impacting their business significantly. But, for instance, the Constellation brands are Modelo. They're trying their best to keep their price down because they know that it'd be disproportionately impacted compared to, say, a Coors Light.
You sort of being part of this supply chain, not sort of, but being a direct part of this supply chain between manufacturers and retailers, you do have to trace cost implications back to the raw materials and the production of the goods. And then you can see it all the way through to the consumer. And so it's important to keep track of those steps and the impact from something all the way as basic that most of us don't spend our days thinking about, like aluminum. It's interesting. Thank you for letting me touch on that one and diverting from the state policy a little bit. Well, speaking of other things you have to keep your eye on and think about, distributors, again, kind of because of where you sit in that supply chain, our take is that you're often among the first to recognize changing consumer trends, behaviors, to spot things that might be coming. So from your take, what's hot? What do we need to have our eye on right now?
I think you're correct that we get a really interesting view into the world, especially as it relates to beverages. What are the hot trends? Well, energy's hot, and it's been hot for a long time. But within the energy category, flavors are hot. Gen Z likes their flavors. In addition to the flavors, it's the better for you. We see brands that like we have a brand that's growing triple digits every year called Electrolyte, and it's kind of a better for you product. So I think that when I think about trends, and this goes across pretty much all categories, flavors, better for you. We're having a lot of activity around non-alcoholic beer. The one that bucks that trend a little bit is sodas. We're still doing really very well with sodas, and we're not exactly sure why. But the things that again, the things that light beer, domestic light beers have been out of favor for several years. Imports are doing very well right now. I think people are choosing to premiumize a lot of the products they drink, even if they drink less.
Interesting. Yeah, it's it'll probably give away my generation if I admit on this podcast that the beverage I'm drinking here with you today is non-flavored water.
Yeah.
So anyone who knows me already knows I'm, that probably tracks for a lot of people. So, but it's very good. Thank you. Well, I just, before we wrap up, I just want to ask if there's anything else about the company here, Columbia Distributing, your people, or the work that you do, or the industry as a whole that you'd like to share with our listeners.
No, like I said, we're very proud of Columbia. We're proud that we're a part of the community. We always say that what matters most is our people and our brands. Hopefully we walk that walk. But no, that's probably about it.
Yeah, good. Well, and I just have to say the room we're in right now in your office here in Wilsonville is a testament to what you just said, because I look around the walls and you've got signs in here for the ducks and the beavers. And you're a beaver, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
So you've got the ducks and the beavers. You've got the timbers and the blazers and the hops. You've got a painting over here on this wall of Haystack Rock and the forest and people hiking. And on this wall, you've got, windsurfers and skiers. And so this room alone is a homage to Oregon and the region and the people that you serve. And I just think that's a very cool, truly embedded testament to how you think about the place that you do business. So as one of your end customers, I'm sure, through many retailers, thank you for that. It's an apparent commitment.
Yeah, I believe that that is a true statement. We're really committed to the state, both Oregon and Washington. We know there's some challenges, but we intend to be here for a long time.
That's good to hear. We are very grateful for that. Well, we could go into a few more details and down some more rabbit holes, but we've promised our listeners a relatively short podcast, so we're going to bring it to a close here. Thank you, Paul Meade, for joining us today, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in. The Oregon Business Matters podcast is a production of Oregon Business and Industry, your statewide chamber of commerce. Our episodes can be found on all the top podcast platforms, and you can find them and more information about OBI at OregonBusinessIndustry.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.